Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 20th of September 2013. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comment. Please accept my apologies for the lack of content patch this week. This was due to the guy that does the editing on this show being on planes and traveling, so that makes things a little bit difficult, but we should be back on regular schedule next week. Coming up in the show today, Sony confirms the ability to capture via HDMI for the PlayStation 4 coming at a later date. Ouya responds to criticism regarding the Free the Games campaign. SOE says that they will ban players for extreme behavior outside of their games. Grand Theft Auto V's PSN version has some streaming problems, and Pokemon X and Y will not, in fact, have a full 3D effect. Stay tuned to the end of the show for your chance to win a copy of Torchlight 2 in our massive Torchlight 2 anniversary giveaway coming your way right about now. It has been confirmed that the PlayStation 4 will allow capture via its HDMI port. It was previously believed that this would not be the case due to the HDCP encoding, the DRM that is generally used on HDMI Blu-ray capable devices in order to make it more difficult to rip Blu-ray quality movies and upload them to torrent sites. The PlayStation 3 suffered similar problems, forcing users to either use a component out in order to capture or use an HDCP stripper, which removed the DRM signal entirely from the HDMI port. Since the PlayStation 4 does not have a component out, it in fact only has an HDMI out, there were some concerns that streamers, YouTubers, and even some of the more traditional media outlets would be forced to essentially commit a crime by using an HDCP stripper in order to publish content from these games. In many countries, removing that DRM and then publishing the content is actually illegal. This includes the United States. Multiple sources, however, now confirm that the PS4 will allow HDMI game capture. However, it's not entirely certain as to when that will be available. President of Sony Worldwide Studio, Shihei Yoshida, confirmed that they will allow the HDMI output in the future. This is what he specifically said. We'll update you when ready. He was then asked if in the future does not mean at launch, and his response was, I would think so, unfortunately. So what this indicates to me is that the PlayStation 4 does currently have HDCP encoding blanket covering the machine. This is fairly similar to the way that the Ouya is currently doing it, although the Ouya has no good reason whatsoever to do it, considering it cannot in fact be used to play Blu-rays. In fact, you're not really going to find a Blu-ray player manufactured these days that doesn't have an unencrypted output. Some are claiming that Sony had to remove the component cable access for that particular reason. However, what it seems like they're doing here is that they are making some changes to turn HDCP off when content such as a movie is not being played. Now, obviously, that is a little bit more of a pain in the arse, and it sounds like it's going to be an update to the system, most likely on the firmware level, once the thing actually comes out. It's probably not a huge priority for them. This does cause a few problems, however, especially around release, because unless you are a media outlet that actually has a dev kit, you're going to be running into some capture problems. Admittedly, not that many. It is possible to bypass this via the use of either an HDMI stripper, which are quite expensive. Alternatively, there are some workarounds that can be used by using an HDMI DVI converter alongside an optical cable. That works as well, at least right now. The problem comes from the idea that actually bypassing that encoding is, as we mentioned, technically illegal. The speculation prior to this announcement was that it was entirely possible that Sony wanted that to be the status quo, because then they would have a legitimate legal reason for taking down footage on YouTube. Now, of course, that would be a rather far-ranging policy, a little bit too much, in fact. It could be used, of course, to stifle legitimate criticism. Is Sony the kind of company that would do that? Well, you know, they've been doing well lately, but I would never put it past any large company to actually use those kind of means to silence criticism of the product, especially on a launch. But what it would seem is that they do want people to be able to capture, and they're willing to take steps in order to make that easier. It does mean, however, on launch that if you do want to capture footage, you're probably going to have to do a couple of workarounds. I wouldn't be so concerned about having footage removed because of illegal stripping of HDCP, though, honestly. It seems unlikely. And for me, it doesn't really affect me. I have no intention of actually putting out videos on PS4 games, but one way or the other, it is concerning to some people, especially those who are not in traditional media outlets with access to a development kit that would allow you to simply output that way. The debate on the acceptable use of video game footage, of course, continues to rage, and I'm interested to see where it goes in the future. Admittedly, it will most likely go in the direction that I don't want it to, but one way or the other, it's good to know that Sony acknowledges this problem and they're willing to actually do something about it. It should be noted, by the way, that Sony was way behind when it came to this particular issue, with the Xbox One having announced at the start of August that it would support game capture devices over HDMI. Following heavy criticism over their handling of the Free the Games program, Ouya has announced a sweeping set of changes to the Free the Games Fund rules. For those who don't know, the Free the Games Fund was designed to encourage development on Ouya by matching donations given via Kickstarter, as long as the project had managed to raise $50,000 or more on its own. This program also required a 6-month exclusivity to the Ouya machine. Now, following two rather sketchy projects, one of which was in fact suspended by Kickstarter for suspicious donation activity, Ouya has announced a set of changes to the program, which include a massive reduction in the amount of money required in order to qualify for funding. Instead of $50,000, they've now reduced it to $10,000. They've also said that they will match 100% of the funding goal to a maximum of $250,000. So depending on what it raises, depends on what you actually end up earning. They also, however, will require a minimum number of backers, which is a direct response to the fact that Gridiron Thunder somehow managed to raise $170,000 with only 180 backers. This, as you might imagine, was extremely suspicious to a lot of people, and many have accused the guys behind Gridiron Thunder of funneling their own funds to the project via fake donors in order to gain extra money from the Ouya Free the Games Fund. There is, of course, no proof of that, but the sheer amount of money given to this project is highly suspect. Now, Ouya have also announced that the exclusivity has been changed to some degree. Now, what this means is that instead of having the blanket 6-month exclusivity period for the Ouya, they are requiring 1 month for every $10,000 funded by Ouya. So if you had a $20,000 goal and $20,000 worth of funding were given by Ouya, then your exclusivity period would be for 2 months as opposed to 6. Finally, they also announced that they will be personally overseeing each and every project and will be vetting them, with the final call available for the Ouya guys to decide as to whether or not that project receives the funding. This is essentially to ensure that the spirit of the program isn't violated, as it were. Now, the developers behind Gridiron Thunder, Mogotext, have announced that they will not be seeking the funds that they qualified for from Ouya, claiming that they have sufficient resources to complete the project on their own. I have to wonder if that was a coordinated effort with Ouya in order to try and minimize the damage, considering that Ouya is probably not too happy with actually matching those funds, considering they do not appear to have been acquired in the spirit of the contest. What a mess, what a mess. Ouya does continue to dig itself into a hole, but this is definitely a positive move, there's no real doubt about that. And they had to do it, they really did, considering there were developers who have already left the platform and others that were weighing their options in that regard, which is crazy when you think about it. One of the games on that list was Rose and Time, which made the most money on Ouya out of any platform that it's currently out on so far. Admittedly, it is not a game that has been released on Steam, so that's quite understandable. Regardless, I'm glad that they've taken this step. I think that a program like this can be very positive, but they clearly didn't execute it correctly. Unfortunately, this is not the first time that they have mishandled something like this, and I am a little bit worried about the future of that platform if they keep flubbing things like that. It does promise itself to be a very indie-friendly platform, but with many indie devs now questioning whether or not it is really going to be a platform that's going to properly support them, Ouya could lose their biggest foot in the door, and that's the notion that their console could be a place where interesting and innovative independent titles are released. In an interview with GamesIndustry.biz, Linda Carlson from SOE has stated that the company is willing to ban players for extreme behavior outside of their games. She stated that in our games, if you're an exploiter, we don't care who you are, how big your guild is, how many people you threaten to take with you when you go. We can control anyone that's playing our games, But if we know who you are and you're abusing somebody on Twitter, we will ban your game account and we will not accept you as a customer ever again. It's not always possible to identify people in that way, but we take that seriously. Well, that's an interesting statement, isn't it? Very much so. It does contradict some things they've done in the past, I've got to say. I'll give an example from PlanetSide 2. There's a fellow by the name of Buzzcut Psycho. He ran an outfit called the Enclave. They were not a bad outfit in and of themselves. It was his behavior that was questionable. He was frequently accused of racist comments, and they were very easily found on the forum. He was very aggressive on his stream. He went after me at one point, so that puts him on a list of about half the people on the internet. But whatever the case, he wasn't banned from the game. I mean, he left for various reasons, as did most of the Enclave, actually. They just believed the game wasn't going in the direction that they wanted, and they just left the game. I would have thought that SOE would have come down hard on him, and if this policy was in place at that time, they probably would have, but apparently they didn't. It is possible that this is just a recent change, honestly, when it comes to their attitude of how to deal with people. Do I agree with it? Well, if you can 100% identify somebody outside of the game, you are just certain beyond all possible reasonable doubt. And this guy is acting up, and clearly his behavior could either translate into the game or he's using out-of-game methods to harass people that are playing the same game as him. Yes. Yeah, I do agree with getting rid of that person. That guy is toxic. And really, there has been a major push over the last year to identify toxicity within gaming scenes and try and forcibly remove it. And there are several different ways of doing that. We've got SOE basically saying, if you act this way even outside of the game, we are going to ban you. We don't care. We don't care about your money at that point, because it's better in the long term for us to have a more accepting community because it brings more people in. Then you've got people like Riot who are attempting to deal with toxicity by pushing the idea that positive play actually wins you more matches and things like that, which is statistically bollocks, quite frankly. I mean, the video that they made recently called Teamwork OP it's a nice video, but let's be honest, correlation and causation are not things that apparently spring to mind to them. You know, the actual logic behind it is pretty poor. Regardless, they're not wrong. You know, you should still not be an absolute jackass to everybody on your team, and it's probably not going to result in all that many positive things happening, but at the same time, you don't feel the need to do that if you're not already losing. It's more of a snowball effect, quite frankly, as opposed to, oh, positive players win more games. It is an increasing problem, and it's getting to the point where it can actually affect sales. The reputation of League of Legends community is pretty apparent, and a lot of people are put off the game by that, even though they have an absurd number of players already. Think about how many more they could have. The last thing they want is the reputation of being toxic. There is no benefit to that. None. Oh, thank God we can attract the toxic demographic. They will truly spend a bunch of money. No, because they're probably young, and most likely are not going to throw money at it whatsoever. You want to attract the older demographic that has more money. Yeah? It's obvious that that's what you want to do, and they will be put off by people acting that way. I'm 29 years old. I do not want to play games with toxic 12-year-olds. Why would I? The main problem, I suppose, that comes out of the idea that you can ban someone for their extreme behavior outside of a game is that it could be used to silence dissent. Yeah? It could. It very well could. The thing is, you can do that anyway, right? You can do that anyway. It's fairly important to realize that these companies hold all the cards when it comes to the control of access to your account. They can get rid of you for a lot of different reasons, and they're all established within the terms of service. And good luck dealing with that. If you want to take them to court over the issue, fine. But if you want to raise a stink and they can just turn around and point to your toxic behavior, nobody will support you at that point. Nobody. It's basically character assassination, but you kind of let yourself in for it because you actually did do this horribly toxic thing that no one is going to support you for doing. Why would we support that twat? No, the answer is no, they're not going to do that whatsoever. So I think maybe there are risks for this to be abused, but I still believe that, frankly, they could abuse this already, and there's not really an awful lot that gamers can actually do about it. It may be that later down the line, considering these accounts can be worth quite a lot of money with the amount of cash that you invest in your free-to-play character, that more protections need to be put in place to stop a company from simply cutting that service off outside of the current purvey of the law. I'm interested to see where that goes. We may have a couple of very notable incidents later down the line where someone is banned from an account that they have sunk hundreds, if not thousands of dollars into for ridiculous reasons, assuming that hasn't already happened on a smaller scale. So I'm a little worried about it, but I agree with it in principle. If you are going to act that way, then removing you from the game is healthier for the overall community. It's my logic that I use for getting rid of people from YouTube, for instance. If I want to block an account, it's like, right, I lose a viewer, but my existing viewers are happier because that guy isn't posting anymore. Yeah, that's the logic that SOE are using here, except they have an awful lot more money on the line than I do. According to tests conducted by Digital Foundry, the PlayStation Network version of GTA 5 suffers significant texture streaming problems in comparison to the regular disc-based version. This is a follow-up to the statement that was made by Rockstar, which indicated you should not install the Play disc for GTA 5 on the 360, which of course uses 2 discs as opposed to the single disc of the PlayStation 3. If players installed the disc regardless, what would happen is that the game would suffer a bunch of graphical issues, including texture popping and streaming issues, stuff either appearing or disappearing, and it would get worse and worse the faster you moved. Now, apparently this is also the case on the PlayStation 3 Network version, which is of course fully installed on the hard drive of the machine. Digital Foundry tested it with both the older 60GB drives as well as an upgraded drive and noticed that there were more significant problems on the older hardware, but even the newer hard drives actually suffered from a bunch of issues in comparison, and those issues got worse the faster you traveled and the faster the game had to pull the assets to actually display them on the screen. The reason why this simply doesn't work is because both versions of GTA rely on streaming from both the hard drive and the disc at the same time. They are designed specifically to work that way. If you do not have that ability, then you will suffer problems. It is indicative of the fact that GTA 5 seems to push the hardware to the absolute limit and is using a huge amount of trickery in order to make it work, which includes streaming from both the hard drive and the actual physical media simultaneously. I am very interested to know if these kind of problems will actually pop up on the next gen. We are still talking about devices with hard drives. We're not talking about devices with SSDs that are still very, very expensive relative to regular hard disks. So when you buy your PlayStation 4, it's not going to have an SSD in it. You buy your Xbox One, it's not going to have an SSD in it either. So you get to the point where you are still stuck with older, slower hard drive technology, yet you need more data. However, you can, of course, cache more data with more RAM, significantly more system RAM, so I would imagine that they're getting around a lot of the problem that way, but we could run into these similar issues, and I'm intrigued to see how it works with the PlayStation 4 a few years down the line, when a lot more people are using SSDs that are getting cheaper and larger all the time. Eventually, we will just abandon hard drives entirely, I would imagine, because solid-state media is just better, especially when they work on the lifespan of those devices. This is also, of course, a rather awkward thing indeed, because I just don't see a way of them fixing it. I mean, if you ordered the version from PlayStation 3 Network, what exactly are they going to do to patch this issue? That they can't, surely. It's a hardware limitation. There's no way. So I have to wonder if full refunds will be issued for this particular version. They've got to do something about that, yeah? If you actually buy the PSN version and it performs worse, which is the exact opposite of what you would expect, you'd either expect in the vast majority of circumstances the same performance, or maybe even slightly quicker on the loading times because you're not having to load from a disk versus a hard drive. But frankly, you would not expect the opposite, yeah? You're getting an inferior experience for the same price. Sony and, of course, Rockstar need to offer an open refund policy for this. Trade it out for a voucher that you can then take to a store and get the physical version. Yeah, that's probably the fairest way. But the reality of the situation is it's not performing properly. You get a worse experience for no apparent reason, which is not what the regular consumer would expect. So it needs to be resolved. It really does. If you are thinking of buying GTA 5, do not get it on PSN. Buy the physical edition, otherwise you will have an inferior experience. And finally, Pokemon X and Y will not, in fact, use the 3D effect throughout the game. They will allow for 3D battles, but the overworld will be presented in 2 dimensions. Users who have played the Pokemon X and Y demo have also reported that while in 3D, the battles suffer from significant frame drops when a lot of effects are on the screen. This lines up with the kind of performance you can expect from using 3D on the 3DS, especially with earlier titles having their frame rate cut in half or worse by utilizing the 3D slider. This is something that I experienced with Dead or Alive as well as Street Fighter 4 early in the console's lifespan, where you would get that 60 frames per second response unless you turn 3D on, where it would drop down to about 25 to 30, which, needless to say, was not that great. I'm interested to see whether or not we see more Nintendo first-party titles actually pushed towards that and moving away from the 3D. Nintendo has supported the 3D idea in their games wholeheartedly, and perhaps rightfully so, because at the end of the day it is a 3D console, but let's be honest, 3D is on the way out. Most people don't really care about 3D anymore, it's becoming less popular, and it's causing performance issues on games. The hardware simply cannot keep up with it, and more to the point, would you prefer your games to be developed for only 2D, or would you prefer them to waste time perhaps on a 3D feature that most people won't even use? Nintendo, of course, has recently announced the 2DS, where they take the 3D feature out of the machine entirely. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if 3D is eventually left by the wayside and left to only specific titles. With the 2DS being a machine that is going to take up market share later down the line, it gives even less incentive to developers to actually waste time creating a 3D version of the game for use with the 3DS's function, if everyone is not going to even have that 3D function to begin with. Alright folks, that would be me done for the day. However, I would like to give you free games. Yes indeed. So it is the first anniversary of Torchlight 2. As you are all probably aware, I adored that game. I thought it was very good indeed, and I would like to celebrate this anniversary by giving away 500 copies. Because we go big or go home on this channel. 500 copies of Torchlight 2. And in keeping with the idea of reducing toxicity within the community, we are going to give these copies to people that post constructive and worthwhile comments on this video. So no first, no spam or anything along those lines. A real comment discussing something that was said in this particular content patch. It could be anything, as long as it was talked about in the content patch. We want to encourage some discussion, want to encourage some interesting comments, and that's how we're going to do it this time around. We will randomly select 500 winners, and we will distribute the codes to those winners via the YouTube private message system. So that means that if you don't have your message box open, you cannot win. So I'd suggest that you allow that to happen. We'll be giving them out on Monday the 23rd. That is Monday the 23rd of September. So you've got a good few days. Have a discussion. See how it goes. You might win a free game if you do. That is me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the content patch. Usually I'd put an OC remix track at the end of this broadcast, but this time around, we're going to play a little bit of music from Torchlight 2 to celebrate their first anniversary. Congratulations, guys, and best of luck in the future. This is the title track from Torchlight 2 by Matt Ullman. I'll see you next time.